Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Don't install the Hangman app. Written by Ken Lewis, performed by Jordan Antle, also known as TheFearRaiser on YouTube. I had just finished another level of my favorite game app when the usual ad popped up. I know the companies that design these games need to make money somehow, but the frequent ads get annoying really fast. The only good thing about most of them is how short they are. This one was different though. It convinced me to watch with its familiar opening tune. I recognized it at the moment I heard those somber violins play. It was Chompin's funeral march. Anyone who has ever watched a cartoon is sure to have heard that composition before. It was so frequently played whenever a character was about to meet his doom. As the music progressed, a brightly colored noose slowly descended, swaying back and forth until it reached the middle of the screen and then stopped. The title of the game started to come into focus letter by letter, while random photos of people's faces appeared with their heads centered in the loop of the rope. The headshots were all cropped neatly so that the rope fit perfectly around their throats. Holy shit, I thought, as the last photo that appeared in the noose was the one I used for my Facebook profile, cropped just like the others. I know it wasn't a major stretch for a game to do something like that. I just wasn't expecting it. That upped the cool factor for me. By the time my picture was displayed, the title of the game had fully appeared and the music cut off. Hangman, it declared in an Old West style font, each letter hanging from a rope. Kudos to the game's marketing department. The ad managed to pique my interest. Eager to learn more, I tapped the screen expecting to be redirected to the App Store where I could read an overview of the game, see some reviews, and maybe watch a video or two of the gameplay. I was surprised when I was redirected to the game's website instead. I don't think I've ever encountered a game that redirected me straight to a website. I figured there was some sort of contract that forced users to go to the provider's official App Store. I wasn't gonna let that deter me from playing though. Not if the game was as cool as I was hoping. The only information listed on the website was the following. You have been hired as the town's new hangman. Executions are scheduled every 3 days. In order to keep your job, you must execute your target within 72 hours. Do you have what it takes to man the gallows? The text was followed by several photos showing how to pick your targets and how to go about hanging them. From what I gathered, this was another one of those augmented reality games that use your phone's camera as the noose to hang your targets. When you first start the game, you select your target from a list called the Condemned. Once you have made your selection, the target's picture is shown on the bottom left of your screen with a countdown timer underneath it. If you tap the picture, you are then taken to the map that shows your current location along with the projected locations of the target, which was supposed to be accurate to about 1,000 feet. Once you have located your target in the real world, you're supposed to tap on the noose icon, which would open your phone's camera app with the minor addition of there being a CGI noose hanging in the middle of the screen. You then hold your phone so that your target's head appears in the middle of the noose for 3 seconds. If you succeed in doing that, the camera takes a picture and you will have successfully hung your target. After you have hung 3 targets, you would then be given the choice of being promoted to the next level or retiring. The listed levels were Hangman, Executioner, and Reaper. The game's sites also featured a leaderboard that had several gamer tags listed as a Hangman, but no one yet listed as an Executioner or Reaper. I suspected that was because the game was recently released and nobody had the time to advance yet. I love dark games, and this one suddenly sounded like a lot of fun. At least fun for someone with a twisted sense of humor like me. I quickly tapped the download button, excited to start playing. Normally, I'd be telling all my friends about this game, but not this time. I wanted to get a head start and be the first person to make it to the Reaper leaderboard before anyone else. As I waited for the game to download, the typical user agreement popped up. It was a dozen pages of the same legal nonsense presented with every game these days. Does anyone even read those? I had no intentions of starting now. I quickly scrolled to the bottom of the text and clicked the agree box, which closed the pop-up box and allowed the game to finish downloading. Moments later, I was prompted to enter my gamertag before it would allow me to continue. I entered the tag I've been using since the 6th grade. Nam Red Nels, or so many of you may have already guessed, Slenderman spelled backwards. What can I say? I went through a phase when I was younger. Like most of my friends at the time, I was obsessed with the character. I grew out of it, but the name stuck. Once the game accepted my tag, I was ready to play. The first thing that popped up was a group of photos of people with the title The Condemned at the top of the screen. There were about a dozen photos shown, and I needed to pick one of them to hang. As I was trying to decide, an unavailable stamp appeared over one of the photos. I assumed that meant that someone had already chosen that person. Good to know I wouldn't be competing against other players to hang the same person. Since this was my initial attempt to play the game, I decided to pick the first name on the list. A person whose tag was listed as Negan8. How original, I thought. As you can guess, he looked like a total asshat right down to his bleach blonde crew cut and the sports jersey he was wearing. I hate sports and had no idea what team the jersey was from and didn't care to find out. The fact that he was wearing it was enough to tell me I wouldn't like him, but I was sure I was going to enjoy hanging him. I tapped Negan8's picture and confirmed him as my choice. Eager to get started, I tapped his picture again to determine his location. It looked like he was over in the shopping district near downtown. If I had to guess, I'd say he was probably at the mall hanging out with his buddies. They should be easy to find as they walked around like an army of clones who thought they owned the place. I looked at the time. It was almost 4 o'clock. If Negan8 was at the mall, I doubt he'd be leaving anytime soon. It was Friday, and he was likely planning on hanging there all night. I wouldn't be able to get out of my apartment until after 5, and wouldn't be able to make it to the mall until around 6. That should have given me plenty of time to track him down and hang him, assuming he was still at the mall by the time I got there. I kept myself occupied by watching TV while I waited for my brother, who was also my roommate, to get home with the car. I frequently checked the Hangman app to make sure Negan8 was where I expected him to be. As I suspected, his location didn't change by more than a few hundred feet, which still put him within the radius of the mall. When I arrived, I parked as close to the food court doors as I could. That was where most of the people my age tended to hang out on Friday nights, and that was where I thought I had the best chance of finding Negan8. It was also the most central location to the various spots the app had placed him over the past 2 hours. The food court is designed in a sort of U shape, with the doors I entered being in the bottom center and access to the rest of the mall being at the top. I walked around the food court twice without finding him and decided to sit down and see if his location had changed on the app. As far as I could tell, he should be somewhere within 1,000 feet of me if the app's margin for error was accurate. Since he wasn't in the food court, that meant he had to be in one of the stores nearby. I got up and walked over to the store directory to try and determine which of the shops he would most likely be in. I had to admit, I liked this game so far. I was starting to feel like a detective trying to track down a criminal, and the chances were pretty high in my opinion that Negan8 probably was a criminal of some sort. I amused myself by thinking I was doing the world a favor by hanging him, and wondered if I could get bonus points for hanging his posse. I was able to narrow down my choices to 3 different shops. My number 1 choice was Champs, a store that sold sports clothing. I figured a guy like Negan 8 couldn't own enough sports jerseys and was probably always on the lookout for more. My number 2 choice was Lids, a store that sold baseball caps. I never understood how a store like that could survive in the mall. Do they really sell that many caps, or are they just ridiculously expensive? Either way, I figured my target likely owned a few. My final choice was GameStop. I only added it to the list since it was in the vicinity and everyone I know owns a PlayStation or an Xbox. He probably did too. I left the food court and headed towards Champs, intending to walk by and see if my target was inside. When I got there and noticed how big the store was, I decided to do a quick walkthrough instead, but he wasn't there. I headed to my next destination, Lids, but I could see that he wasn't there either. That store was tiny, and I could see the interior well before I got there. That just left GameStop. I stopped for a second and pulled my phone out to check my target's current location, which according to the game, hadn't changed. He was here somewhere. I just had to find him. I continued on my way to the game store, which took me past the south entrance on the opposite side of the mall from the food court. Near that entrance is a large decorative fountain filled with coins. It was from there that I heard a group of guys suddenly start laughing obnoxiously. Naturally, I turned to see what was so funny and was surprised to see my target sitting on the edge of the fountain, his 3 croonies standing in front of him laughing. I changed course and started walking from the opposite side of the fountain, trying to find a good vantage point for my phone's camera. I hate them all and wanted to hang Negan 8 and get out of there as soon as possible. Crowds weren't my thing and the mall was quickly filling up with choppers. "Shut up!" I heard Negan 8 say to the trio standing before him. "You'd suck as a detective," Beanpole taunted. "You're like Inspector Gadget." "Let's get out of here," Pimpleface whined. "Your time ran out hours ago. Why are you still looking for her?" "Because he has the hots for her," Chubby answered. "He likes those nerdy girls." All 3 of them started laughing again. Negan 8 just sat there glaring at them. Interesting, I thought to myself. It seems Negan 8 may be playing Hangman as well and failed to hang his first target. I wonder if that is why he was listed as one of the choices under the condemned when I was picking a target. If that was the case, I wasn't going to let that happen to me. I walked around the fountain until I came to the bench that gave me a decent vantage point to sit and aim my camera at Negan 8 without being too obvious. I wasn't able to hear the rest of their conversation from where I was sitting, but from the looks of their faces, it was obvious his friends were still giving him a hard time. I opened the game and tapped on the noose icon, which opened my camera app. I held my phone like I was reading a text while trying to angle it to get Negan 8's head in the middle of the noose. Once I had him lined up, a countdown started. The number 3 appeared at the bottom of the screen. As the number 3 was replaced by the number 2, Negan 8's hands flew up to his neck, grasping at something. I looked over at him, and then back on my phone. His hands were perfectly lined up with the game-generated noose on my screen. It was as if he could feel it and was trying to remove it from his neck. Beanpole, Chubby, and Pimpleface started to panic after they realized their friend's distress wasn't an act. Negan 8 stood up as the counter changed from 2 to 1, his face turning blue. Without realizing it, I had also stood up, which kept his head locked into my phone's noose. I froze. I didn't know what to do. I watched in horror as the counter changed from 1 to 0, and Negan 8 fell backwards into the fountain. His friends just stood there and stared as nearby shoppers rushed to the fallen kid's aid. That broke me out of my paralysis. I quickly turned and walked out of the south entrance and around the outside of the mall until I reached my car. I didn't look at my phone until I was sitting in my car. When I did, what I saw made me so sick to my stomach. There was a CGI cut screen of an executioner hanging a man over and over with the words, "Congratulations, you did it." Underneath that was, "Click here to choose your next target." The worst part was that the picture my phone had taken of Negan 8 as he died was superimposed over the hanging man's head. I drove around town aimlessly for the next few hours, trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to find some way to accept it and move on, but I couldn't find the silver lining. When I finally returned home, I walked through the door to find my brother sitting on the couch playing the Xbox. "Where the hell did you go?" he asked without pulling his eyes away from the military violence exploding on the TV screen. "I thought you were going to the mall." "Out," was all I offered in explanation and headed to my room. "Hey," he called out, "I was meaning to ask you, have you heard of that new app game called Hangman?" "Why?" I stopped and turned towards him. "I downloaded it a few days ago and tried it out. Running around and trying to take pictures of someone is stupid. I was going to tell you not to bother with it." Once I had locked myself in my bedroom, I opened the Hangman app and tapped the Choose Your Next Target button. I wasn't surprised by what I saw. There was only one person listed on the condemned page. MGR Grief. I always hated that gamer tag. My brother thought it was clever because our last name was Grief, and he liked being a pain in the ass when he played games. Thus, the Grief. Grief play on words. I guess I should have read the user agreement before I started playing. Hello, Chilling Tale listeners. This is Jordan Antle, the narrator of the story you just heard. Thank you for listening. Chilling Tales for Dark Nights has graciously allowed me to take a moment to tell you a bit about my podcast, and I'd be honored if you could check it out. I just started my first ever podcast called Let's Get Personal, where we take a look at sensitive topics and discussions that most people aren't so comfortable talking about. You can find the Let's Get Personal podcast on Spotify, iTunes, and Stitcher, and follow us over on the LGP podcast on Facebook and Twitter.
The first thing you should know about me is that I'm deaf. I've been this way since I was a teenager. The second thing you should know about me is that I've been living in my basement for the past month. I'm terrified of going upstairs because they might see me through the windows and... It all happened about 2 months ago. I was sitting in my backyard when it started, this humming. I didn't hear it, of course, but I felt it. An intense, rapid vibration tickling the soles of my bare feet as I sat in my backyard, drinking a beer and reading a book. The humming started so suddenly that I jumped a little and looked around for the source. Maybe a big truck or some other large vehicle was rumbling nearby, but I saw nothing that seemed to correspond with the hum. I live in a small neighborhood in a small town, and large vehicles are not a common sight. I walked to the front of my house and looked at my neighbors. A few people were standing in their driveways and front yards and were looking around, seemingly for the source of the strange humming. It was starting to get dark, and I knew I couldn't be of much help at detecting the source of the noise, so I started to head inside my house when I felt a hand on my shoulder, and in spite of myself, I jumped a little. I turned to see a handsome man named Clark Walker who had just moved in across the street from me a few weeks ago. I must have looked surprised or startled because he put his hands up as if he were surrendering. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said. He didn't know how to sign, but I could read his lips. Clark had a face full of sharp features with a very full mouth. I definitely didn't mind watching his mouth as he talked. I held up a finger, gesturing for him to hang on a second while I fished my phone out of my back pocket. Then I opened up a communication app and began typing. I typed my message in a voice probably robotic and stilted relayed my words. "It's okay," I told him. "Happens all the time. You're a lot less creepy than Mr. Fripp." I nodded my head toward the house to the immediate right of mine. Harold Fripp was in his late 60s and had a habit of snooping around the trash cans and mailboxes of other people on the street. "Well, that's a comfort," he said. Then his face grew a little dark and his usually pleasant mouth drew into a tight frown. "Any idea what's going on?" he asked. Clark had distracted me from the hum, but as I looked down at my bare feet, I could still feel the vibrations coming up through the ground. I started typing again. "I don't know what it is," I said. "I can feel it, though. Is it a very loud noise?" "When it first started, I did think it was loud," he said. "But the longer it goes on, the less I notice it. Kind of like the noise power lines make. If I don't think about it, I don't even really hear it anymore." "Weird," I typed. Not the most profound response, but I really didn't know what else to say. I sort of understood what Clark meant. If I didn't focus on the vibrating, the sensation seemed to fade. But as soon as I started paying attention to it, I was aware of this tickle on the bottom of my feet. That alone was unsettling. Not knowing what the source was or why it was happening was outright disturbing. "Yeah," Clark said. "Anyway, so yeah. What I really wanted to ask you was if you'd come to my barbecue this weekend." I tried so hard to play it cool and not smile like a doofus. And I failed miserably. I nodded and signed, "Thank you." Clark smiled. "Hey, I know that one." He signed back, "You're welcome." The humming didn't dissipate over the next week. It never stopped. And I wasn't sure at first, but it seemed like the vibrations were getting more intense. By the time Clark's barbecue rolled around, the entire neighborhood was in an uproar about the mysterious humming. I was sitting by the pool in Clark's backyard watching a group of women chat. They were huddled really close together and seemed to be talking in hushed tones, which made me all the more interested in eavesdropping. I focused in on Myrtle Evans, the leader of the local mommy group. She had just given birth about a month before, and most of her conversations consisted of tips to get her pre-baby body back. But not that day. "I can't get Joey to settle down," she said to the two other women huddled around her. "He wails and fusses all the time. I just don't know what to do." "You know, I've been having the same problem with Joanna," said one of the other women. Another new mom, her baby was about 6 months old. I turned my attention away from the women and stared at the water in the pool. I had seen other women talking about having trouble with fussy babies in the past few days, but I hadn't thought anything of it. Babies were fussy, right? But every baby in our neighborhood? And inconsolably cranky? Something just wasn't right. And then I remembered the humming. What if that's what it was? My thoughts were disrupted by a person plopping down next to me. I saw Clark's reflection in the pool and smiled, but my smile was short-lived as I noticed his reflection seemed off. It was grainy, kind of pixelated. But that wasn't right. Then I realized it was the water. The water was vibrating so much it distorted Clark's reflection. I grabbed his arm and pointed at the pool. His gaze followed my outstretched arm and he stared at the water for a bit. Then he looked at me and nodded before standing up and running inside his house. I just sat there staring, wondering what the hell was going on. I stood up, ready to leave, when Clark returned with a glass of water. He set it on the concrete next to the pool and we sat down to look at it. The water started rippling as soon as the glass touched the concrete. I pulled my phone from my pocket and started typing. "It's gotten worse," I said. Before Clark could say anything, everyone turned their heads to the front of the house. Then they started running toward the street. Clark stood up and started to go with them, but then turned back and held out his hand to help me up. I stood up, searching his face for some kind of answer about what was happening. "A woman," he said. "There's a woman screaming." He grabbed my hand and we ran to join the others. When we got to the front of the house, I saw a group of women huddled around a lump in the street. The rest of the neighbors stood in Clark's front yard looking horrified. The lump in the street turned out to be a woman, and she was screaming and clutching something to her chest. Something small and wrapped in a blanket that was stained with dark splotches. My stomach turned when I realized it was a woman who lived at the end of the street, and that she was clutching what used to be her baby. I grabbed Clark's face with both hands and turned him toward me. "What happened?" I mouthed. He led me away from the crowd toward his front steps, then sat me down and crouched in front of me. Her baby. He looked like he might be sick. He took a deep breath and composed himself, then began again. "Her baby wouldn't stop crying, had been crying all week. So she picked him up and slammed him against the wall in his nursery until he stopped crying." I stared at him horrified. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. I wish I could say that was the worst thing that happened. The humming did indeed affect babies. Something about their skulls being thinner, so the humming caused them intense pain and discomfort. At least that's what I've gathered from the stuff I found online. The children in the neighborhood were affected next. The humming was getting more intense each day. 2 weeks after it started, the kids in the neighborhood turned. They gathered in the cul-de-sac and just stood there. Then they started moving down the street like a pack of animals. I watched them from my window, thinking it was some sort of game, until they got to Mr. Fripp's house. He was lurking in his yard, watching Clark wash his car. He didn't even see the attack coming. The first child reached him and shoved him to the ground. Then, one after another, they descended upon him. They kicked at him and beat him as he lay on the ground, his hands over his head. And they continued their assault until the old man stopped moving. Then they reassembled and began moving down the street again. I saw Clark standing in the middle of the street. He tried to run over to help Mr. Fripp when he saw what the kids were doing, but he was too late. He looked up at me, eyes wide with fear. He started making his way to my house, but the pack of crazed children would have intercepted him before he made it, so he turned and bolted into his house. I watched as he closed the curtains and turned out all the lights, and I followed suit, making sure my doors and windows were locked and that my lights were out. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to see a message from Clark. "No matter what happens, stay inside. I don't know what's going on." I felt the tears streaming down my face then, and my vision blurred so much it was hard to type out my response. "I'm scared," was all I could manage. "Me too," was Clark's response. I went to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find and barricaded myself in my bedroom, but I couldn't fall asleep. The next morning, I pulled my curtains aside to see the bodies of all of our elderly neighbors lying in the street. They'd all been beaten to death. I couldn't see the children. I did see Clark peeking from his window, and then my phone buzzed. "Stay inside. I can't see the kids. They could be anywhere." I nodded before pulling my curtains closed. And that day, all I did was sit on my couch and sob. That night, I noticed flashing lights outside my window. I pulled myself up from the couch and peeked outside. Some of my adult neighbors were walking around with flashlights and looked like they were shouting, looking for the children. The bodies of our older neighbors were no longer in the street, but the bloodstains from their battered bodies remained. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but before they had a chance to fall, I was distracted by the commotion outside. A handful of adults just dropped to the ground and began writhing, holding their heads in their hands. Some of them vomited. Their mouths were hanging open, and I could tell they were screaming. Then, one by one, in rapid succession, their heads exploded. They just burst in a mess of red and pink and white. I jumped away from my window and put my hand on my mouth, and my chest and my throat began to sting, and I realized I was screaming. And that was how they found me. I stepped back to the window and found myself staring into Clark's face, but it wasn't his face. Not anymore. His eyes were bloodshot and his mouth hung slack, but when his eyes met mine, his expression snapped tight. His mouth creased into a grimace and his eyes narrowed in a look that just radiated hatred. I stumbled backward, and that's when I noticed my house was surrounded. The silhouettes of my neighbors filled my windows, and it looked like they were trying to beat their way inside. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the block of knives from the kitchen, my phone, and my laptop, and locked myself in my basement. I worked from home, and my basement is where I have my office set up. It's nice and cool down here, and there's enough room for the surveillance equipment I use to keep an eye on the house when I'm working. Since I can't hear the doorbell, I have a video monitoring system that lets me see who's at my door. I also have motion detecting cameras set up in the house in case an intruder breaks in. For the first 2 weeks I was down here, I wished I didn't have them. My neighbors, my former neighbors, whatever they are now, they roamed through my house. They didn't seem to be searching for me, but they also weren't leaving. Every now and then, one of them would drop to the floor and writhe around before his head burst. Today was the first day I didn't see any of them moving around upstairs, inside or outside. I desperately want to go and see what's happening, but I'm terrified. There's no answer when I call 911, and no one has responded to my messages seeking help. I have no idea how widespread this is. I have enough food and water down here to last me a little while longer, but I'm not sure that matters. You see, the humming hasn't stopped. It's only getting stronger. The vibration is so strong it can rattle a bottle of water right off my desk. And I can feel this pressure It's growing right behind my eyes. And right now, my head is killing me.
Pumpkin Seeds, written by Kevin David Anderson, performed here by Jason Hill. Halloween jack-o'-lanterns decorated the Lindens' front porch. Their soft glow illuminated Mark Linden's dazed expression. Sheriff Kincaid tried to appear positive as he put a gentle hand on Mark's shoulder. Having no family of his own, Kincaid could only imagine what Mark was going through. "Is there anyone we can call?" Kincaid hunkered down a bit so his thick 6-foot frame didn't tower over Mark as much. Mark's eyes were shut, and Kincaid waited patiently for him to speak. He knew Mark was an educated man, the kind that had been keeping up with current events. Mark would know that his wife wasn't dead. Not yet. The Daily Gazette article had been very detailed, more so than Kincaid had liked, about the MO of the Riverdale snatcher. Mark's eyes opened. "How long do we have?" "Till she's found." The time between abduction and the discovery of the bodies, ritualistically pinned up, like a frog on a dissection slab, varied from 2 to 5 days. Away from the press, the FBI had shared with Kincaid that it really depended on how much gratification the snatcher was deriving from the current victim. "We're gonna find her," Kincaid said. "I just took the kids out trick-or-treating. We were only gone a half hour. I can't believe... Oh, God. Oh, Karen." Mark sobbed into both hands. "We'll find her." Kincaid tried to remember what church the Lindens attended. It wasn't St. Andrew's because that's where he went. "Do you go to First Community?" Mark nodded, his hand still covering his face. "Would you like me to call Pastor Johansson?" "I'm sure he can..." From the corner of his eye, Kincaid saw one of the deputies waving at him from the sidewalk. Excuse me for a minute, Mark." Kincaid started down the porch steps. By the time his foot hit the grass, he was angry. Whatever reason Deputy Simon had for interrupting, Kincaid knew it would be either trivial or just plain stupid. Most of Kincaid's deputies were kids, fresh out of high school, and not one of them had enough confidence to handle anything on their own. To a veteran like Kincaid, a man with 15 years as a city cop and 2 tours of duty in the Marines, it was infuriating. Kincaid met the deputy in the middle of the lawn. "What the hell is so goddamn important you need to interrupt me every 10 seconds, Simon?" Looking down, Simon seemed to be searching for words in the vicinity of his shoelaces. You know, he had told me to take pictures of the crime scene?" Kincaid was hoping to get some shots before the FBI showed up and shut him out again. "Yeah. Did you forget the camera?" No, sir, I brought it," the deputy said. "Batteries are dead, though. I've been meaning to swing by the Walgreens for some new ones." Kincaid shook his head. The day he first laid eyes on Simon's resume, he saw no bullet points that listed idiot or first-class moron as his characteristics. Why did I hire this guy? "I have a camera in my trunk, so never mind that. Here's what I want you to do," Kincaid said. Simon nodded, taking out a notepad. "Take Mark inside to be with his kids. Then, call Pastor Johansson. Tell him what happened and ask him to come over. Then, call Karen Linden's sister. Think she's in Idlewood or something. I'm sure Mark would want her here. Times like this, a man needs the support of the Lord and his family. Did you get that, deputy, or were the words I used too large?" Simon stopped writing and then started reading aloud. Take Mr. Linden inside, call Pastor Johansson and sister in Idlewood." "Got it." The deputy slapped his notebook shut and marched off toward the house. Kincaid felt an eye roll coming on, but he stopped it, sighed instead, and then headed to the street. His squad car, parked at the curb, had a disposable camera in the glove box, but he was hoping that he left his digital in the back compartment. When he reached the rear of the car, he paused a moment, remembering the huge mess he left in the trunk. To find his camera, he was going to have to dig. Glancing back at the porch, Kincaid wanted to make sure Simon was following instructions. The orders seemed simple enough, but that had never stopped Simon from screwing them up before. Simon escorted Mark into the house. He shut the door, leaving the porch vacant, save for 3 jack-o'-lanterns, eyes glowing orange. Their devilishly carved eyes cast an almost knowing stare at Kincaid. A chill crept over his neck, and he slapped it away. He never liked jack-o'-lanterns. Damn things just gave him the willies. He popped the trunk and peered inside. Yep, it was full-on mess. Jesus, the camera is probably all the way at the bottom. He reached in and lifted Karen Linden's bound feet off the spare tire and then tried to roll her further back. She still appeared to be unconscious from the blow he delivered to the back of her head. No sign of the camera, though. Damn. When Kincaid grabbed a fistful of her hair to lift her head, her eyes popped open. She tried to scream through her gag, a sock shoved so far down her throat, only the torn fringes of the toe section dangled outside her bleeding lips. Kincaid leaned in, putting his face inches from hers. Don't even think about it. Make one sound, and I'll pull that tongue right out of your pretty little head. Karen Linden blinked and sunk back into the trunk. That's better, Kincaid said. Besides, there will be plenty of time for screaming later. He released her hair and slammed the trunk closed. He glanced back at the Lindens' porch, prepared to meet the watchful leer of glowing jack-o'-lanterns. But there were 2 more sets of eyes staring back at him than he'd prepared himself for. Mark and Deputy Simon stood on the porch, looking astonished. Kincaid shook his head. Oh, Simon, you're such a screw-up. The instructions were so simple. Take Mark inside. Call Johansson. Call the sister. What the hell were they doing on the porch? The deputy went for his gun, but had trouble releasing the holster strap. Kincaid knew that hiring deputies that made Barney Fife look competent would prove beneficial at some point. He cocked his head and swiftly pulled his revolver, leveling it at the deputy. Before Simon could get his weapon free, Kincaid fired. The deputy was hit square in the chest and fell back against the house. As he slid down the wall, he finally managed to unholster his pistol. The gun fell into his lap when his butt hit the porch. Kincaid turned the revolver on Mark. The frightened man dove out of the way. Kincaid fired twice, trying to hit Mark in the air, but his shot shattered the living room window instead. Mark landed out of sight, toppling a few uncarved pumpkins off the porch banister. Screams came from the inside of the house. The kids, Kincaid thought. Jesus, I am in no mood to kill kids. Neighborhood dogs started barking. Porch lights came on, and behind him, across the street, a screen door squeaked open. Damn! He lowered his weapon. Time to move on. Well, this town was about tapped out anyways. Kincaid stepped around to the driver's side of his squad car and reached for the door handle. A speeding glint of orange reflected in the car window. When he turned, the pumpkin hit him in the face. The blow knocked him back against the car. His head cracked against the lights on the roof. He slid down onto the grass, wiping pumpkin guts from his eyes. The juices stung. Pumpkin seeds slid down his cheeks like unwanted tears. His fingers grazed his nose, and he winced in pain. It was probably broken. Kincaid should have been angry, but he wasn't. Mark was now fumbling around Simon's body. Nice throw, big guy. Kincaid searched for his gun in the pumpkin innards on the ground. His piece had fallen into the gutter, hammer still cocked. He clasped it as Mark came down the steps, holding something out in front of him. Kincaid's eyes focused with a suddenness that made him blink. He brought his revolver up. Mark had Simon's gun and was rushing across the lawn, pointing the weapon and frantically searching for the safety. Kincaid chuckled. That's the spirit, fight for it. Kincaid took aim and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. He pulled again. Nothing. He examined the revolver and couldn't believe his eyes. Pumpkin seeds, wedged in like a doorstop, were keeping the hammer from falling. He pushed the seeds out with his thumb, then brought the revolver up again fast. A pistol shot boomed and flashed before his eyes. The first shot hit his chest like a baseball bat to the ribs. The second and third pierced his gut with the burning intensity of branding irons. When the shots ended, Mark stood in front of him, silhouetted in the porch light. He was still pointing Simon's pistol at Kincaid's chest and, shaking like a child, kept pulling the trigger. Click, click, click. Good job, cowboy, Kincaid said, choking up blood. He brought his hand to his face. Pumpkin juice dripped down his fingers, mixing with splatters of crimson. Kincaid convulsed and pulled in a last shallow breath as he glanced up at the Lindens' porch. Maybe he was hallucinating, but he swore that the jack-o'-lanterns were grinning at him. Twisted grins, glowing with malevolence. Then, just before it all went black, Kincaid remembered that he had never actually seen Mark throw that pumpkin.
I saw my mate Ryan 3 weeks ago. For the first time in about 5 months. First time since I'd been thrown out of that gym, with the Wreckits closing in on me. I nearly didn't recognise him on the crowded tube platform, with his grey hoodie over his head and his big black bomber jacket that strained at the seams with the bulk of the man underneath. He looked terrible. His veins and arteries were so dark that they looked like they'd been drawn on. His eyes were crusted with that yellow powder. So was his nose, and the edges of his mouth. His ears seemed blocked with the stuff. More than that, though, his arms and chest were huge and solid, inhumanly so. What? Ryan? I croaked. Ryan's head turned towards me. His neck creaked like an antique rocking chair. His dusty, yellowed eyes seemed glazed until they lit up with a brief flicker of recognition. His mouth tried to crack into a smile, but his lips moved with the stiffness of a ventriloquist's dummy. You could almost say it was the first time I'd ever seen Ryan, because before that night, Ryan had always been Wasp, a nickname he'd earned when we were both about 12, and he barged into me running away from a wasp's nest he'd accidentally disturbed when climbing on his auntie's roof. Wasp was a good mate. Mostly. He was shy, and positively awful with girls. Our first fight was just after I started dating my first girlfriend, Laura, and he revealed that he'd long harboured a thing for her. In his eyes, I was stealing her from him. Honestly, had I known in advance that he liked her, I would have backed off. But he was acting like he was entitled to her just because he silently decided he liked her first. And that pissed me off enough to date her anyway. Not my finest hour, I admit. He wasn't bad looking, but he had a face that needed a good growth spurt to make handsome. He needed puberty to hurry, and square out his chin and line it with some designer stubble. But it never did. See, when I was about 14, I went from 5 feet tall to 6 feet 2 and bulked out accordingly. Wasp, however, seemed to top out around 5 foot 4. We used to rib him about it, and he used to laugh along. But I guess he took it more to heart than we thought, because pretty soon he started pumping weights. To be honest, for every good mate instinct I had to try and convince him that he was fine just the way he was, he did genuinely seem happier when bulked up. Within a few months, you'd never see him without a protein shake in his hand. He ate chicken fillets like some people chew gum, and he always carried an issue of Men's Health or Gym Fitness in his bag. Don't get me wrong, we still thought he looked like a knob poured into that tight t-shirt with a neckline plunging so low you could nearly see his belly button, and we all delighted in telling him as such as often as possible. But it gave him confidence, and I guess that's all that mattered. I mentioned our first fight was over a girl, but so was our worst fight. The summer I turned 15, I heard that Wasp's little sister Robin fancied me. I know, sisters are off limits, but I was young and stupid and hadn't really got a grasp of my hormones. The same genes that had missed Wasp had blessed his little sister with a petite figure and delicate features, all set off with deep blue eyes and dirty blonde hair. We got together at a party, and when Wasp found out, he was furious. He screamed at me, called me a bastard, and warned me to stay away from her. I'm not proud of what I said next. I know it was a low blow, but I was so angry that he told me off in front of everyone I just lost my temper. "Or what?" I yelled in his face. "What you gonna do, punch me in the shin?" Cue big laughs from everyone. I felt awful. I spent the next few weeks all but begging for forgiveness and promising to leave Robin alone. One day during a weights session, I guess he gave in. He squared up to me, flexing his growing arms, and he said, "If what you said the other day is true, all the worse for you, because if I can't punch you in the face, I'm going to deliver one hell of a smack to your bollocks." With that, a big grin spread across his face, and he punched me in the arm before going back to working out. It seemed like the problems were all done. But then he joined Meatz. See, when Wasp had got serious about bulking up, he started touring the local gyms. My family had a group membership to this fancy gym on an industrial site just off the motorway. It was huge, with an indoor pool, an outdoor pool, tennis court, spa, sauna, the works. It even had a bar, cafe type place that always seemed far fuller than any part of the actual gym. I'd brought Wasp there once and he hated it. He couldn't understand why anyone would pay that much to spend 20 minutes on the cross ski and then 2 hours reading the Sunday papers once a month. Needless to say, when he found the gym he liked, it was a scuzzy, sweaty, male-only 24-hour type place. All strip lights and free weights and tattooed guys doing endless squats. Before Wasp got as heavily into it, we'd call the other guys there Wreckits, due to how much they looked like... well, I'm sure you can figure it out. It was a place called Meatz, because in the grand tradition of male-only gyms, they had to pick a name that could double for a gay bar. It was a small, converted warehouse surrounded by barbed chain-link fence. Car park was a mix of dirt and rubble with potholes that never seemed to fully dry out. The main shutter was permanently down, and the gym's logo had been crudely spray-painted over it, though it was now faded. The only usable entrance was a small side door covered in chip blue paint, with a window that had wire crisscrossed through it. Security didn't appear to be a major concern for what was essentially a room full of men whose idea of a fun time involved picking up incredibly heavy things and then just sort of putting them down again. So Wasp started going to Meatz and carried on bulking up. But something changed when he started training there. After a few months, gone were the protein shakes and the chicken fillets and his macronutritional protein bars. Gone was the permanent bottle of water he carried around. I thought maybe he'd given up or reached his goal, but his bulking didn't seem to stop, or even slow. If anything, it sped up. He let his subscription to Men's Fitness expire and stopped drinking green tea, but his muscles didn't stop growing. Even girls started to notice. They used to look at him with flirty intrigue, but this was slowly turning into puzzled concern. The amount of bulk was concerning enough, but it was the speed at which he bulked up that was more worrying. Now, don't get me wrong, we're still young, but still, this was happening on a scale of weeks, if not days. I mean, I swear I could see stretch marks around his biceps where his skin just couldn't keep up. I asked him how he kept bulking without all his supplements, and he grinned. "The guys at Meatz sorted me out something new," was all he'd say. The breaking point came one day when Wasp fell down some stairs. It was nothing serious. He was too busy reading some news story about a suicidal man who jumped in front of a truck and just missed a step that sent him tumbling. He only fell a few feet, but the problem was how he landed. He put his hand out to break his fall, but his bag threw him off balance, and he landed on the outside of his palm, wrenching his elbow the wrong way. The sound was wrong. I'm pretty squeamish about these kind of things. I can't hear someone being sick without heaving myself. And that fraction of a second sound clip of that guy's teeth on the curb in American History X makes my balls hide somewhere in my large intestine. So my face was sucking a lemon at the anticipation of the sickening, squelching, dull crack I was about to hear when Wasp's arm broke. But that wasn't what I heard. It was sharper and louder and stiffer than I expected. It sounded like tree bark snapping, like a branch giving way when a kid tries to climb it. When I dared open my eyes, Wasp was just looking at his broken arm as it hung limply from its new bonus elbow. The break was bad enough, but the wound, it was bloodless. There was a good 2-inch tear in the skin that should have been gushing with blood, but it just hung open, flapping like torn wrapping paper. A fine, yellowish powder dripped out onto the floor. "I'll have to go," said Wasp, shoveling the spilt contents of his bag back inside. "No, wait," I called. "You have to go to the hospital." Then I saw it. I thought it was a pen at first, but no, it was a syringe, clear as day. Of course it was. How had it taken this long to figure that out? There's only one way he could have kept up the gains without all his powders and shakes. He was on steroids. That's what those chav wreckits had sorted out for him. Seriously, Wasp, come on. I tried to follow him, but he ran. I called him all afternoon and into the evening, but no answer. Eventually I went round to his house, but Robin hadn't seen him. There was only one other place I could imagine he'd go. Meatz. I pounded on the chipped blue door. "Membership number." "Look, I'm not a member. I just need to know if Ryan is here." Membership number." The wreck-it behind the door mumbled again. "I'm not a member. Is Ryan here?" "Membership number." "Oh, hell, I don't know, 12? The door clicked open. As I said, security did not appear to be a major concern. I stormed past the wreck-it working what passed for a front desk. In reality, it was just a fold-out table, topped with a wood-effect plastic. On it sat a spreadsheet on a clipboard and a small blue strongbox. Quite the business empire. I carried on marching until I saw Wasp, bench pressing some obscene amount of weight. Another towering wreck-it behind him was a spotter. I stormed over, all ready to rip into him about steroids and abuse and getting his broken arm seen to. "Wasp, what are you doing? Your arm." "Stop calling me Wasp. My name's Ryan." "What? Since when don't you like being called Wasp?" "I know why you call me it. Just 'cause I'm small and annoying and pointless and I ruin everything, yeah?" "What? Of course not. That's not the reason. You damn well know it." "Of course it is. And now you're just mad I'm getting bigger than you." "Mate, when I met you, you were literally running away from wasps. How's it taken you this long to tell me you didn't like it?" "Yeah, whatever. It was this moment I realised all the other wreckets had stopped working out and now had just sat on their equipment, watching our little domestic unfold. The room seemed bigger on the inside. The strip lights buzzed and beat down on the equipment, but the room's perimeter remained bathed in darkness. In those shadows, more of the wreckage swayed and watched. Look, Ryan, I'm sorry if you don't like the name. I won't use it anymore, I promise. I'm just worried about your arm. What about my arm? It's fine. Mate, I saw it snap. It was... By now, Ryan had sat up on his equipment and was leaning forward with his hands in his lap. His arm was fine, save for a particularly angry-looking stretch mark where the tear had been. Why isn't it... See, I'm fine. I'll prove it. With that, he lay back down under the equipment. Put some more weight on. His spotter turned around and started fixing some more weights to the bar. I went to stop him, but wordlessly, 3 of the wreckets who'd been silently watching stood up and took a step towards me. The spotter finished putting the extra mass on. Ryan wrapped his fingers around the scored metal, and I heard a faint creaking, as though a tree was blowing in a gust. He took a deep breath and lifted the bar off the holder. He slowly lowered it down towards his chest and then, through gritted teeth, pushed the whole thing back up in locked arms. Repeat, repeat, repeat. It seemed to be getting easier with each rep. After 6 or so, he started talking. See, mate, this is why you're here. You can't stand that I'm becoming better than you. Repeat. No, Ryan, that's not it. Repeat. Yes, it is. I'm finally not small. Repeat. Or annoying. Repeat. Or pointless. Repeat. And you hate it. I heard a tearing sound, like the first cut into a new piece of card. The angry red stretch mark near his bicep had ripped open again. That same weird yellow powder was falling out. Some of the other wreckets saw this too and took a step towards us. Ryan, please, you were never... Just leave. Go crying to my sister, you sodding butt. You don't want to see what comes next. Repeat. Ryan, stop. The tear widened. Leave. Repeat. Ryan, repeat. Go! The sound I heard next is imprinted on my mind forever. When I was 7, I spent the summer at my granddad's house, and he had this wide, fenceless front garden with a crabapple tree in the centre. I lost control of the football I'd been kicking about, and I followed it into the road without looking. There was a squeal of tyres and a blur of blue metal as a speeding car swerved onto the pavement and across my granddad's lawn straight into the tree. The sound was unforgettable, a deep, powerful splintering of wood. And Ryan's arm snapped too, just like the tree. Ryan's arm tore off at the bicep, and the weight came crashing down directly onto his chest. A tremendous cloud of light yellow powder pumped steadily out of his arm and engulfed him. I tried to rush forward and help, but 2 of the wreckets grabbed me and dragged me backwards towards the door. I reached out, screaming for Ryan, but more wreckets surrounded him, blocking him from view. The strip lights started shutting off. They threw me out of the door into a pothole full of oily water. I sprung up to get back in, but the door was already shut. The final lights inside went off. I stood there pounding on the door until it occurred to me to call the police. However, when they arrived and bust the door down, they found nothing. Just a bunch of wreckets pumping iron. Police searched the place but found no trace of Ryan or the mysterious steroid they appeared to be using. 5 months passed. I didn't see or speak to Ryan once during that time. I was convinced he was terribly injured, or in hospital or worse. Imagine my surprise then when I ran into him one night on a crowded tube platform while awaiting the next northbound train. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was Ryan, all right, and in one piece. Ryan, mate, what happened to you? What do you mean? I've never felt better. Where have you been? Everyone's looking for you. Everyone misses you. No, they don't. Not stupid little wasp. Not pointless, annoying wasp. Please, Ryan, I thought we got past this. No one thinks you're... Save it. I don't need your apologies. Not anymore. I've got a way to prove it. Prove what? Prove I'm not pointless. The northbound train's lights shone down the platform as it approached the station. For the love of... Ryan, no one ever said... He raised a brown, solid-looking hand and shushed me. Shh. As I said, I'll prove it. Ryan, please. But he only grinned widely again before turning towards the train and charging. And he jumped straight in front of him. I was back on my granddad's lawn again. That same sound. That same thick, powerful crack a speeding vehicle makes as it ploughs into a block of dense wood. In an instant, what had once been Ryan became a shower of splinters and yellow powder. I choked and gasped as the substance filled the air. Commuters standing nearby started screaming, then fell to their knees, coughing and heaving as they too tried desperately to shield themselves from the debris. It was no use. I cradled my head in my hands and felt a shower of powder fall from my hair. I scrubbed furiously in my efforts to dislodge it, and ended up with lungs full of whatever it was. It clung to my tongue with a sour sting. That was 3 weeks ago. Since the day Ryan leapt to his death, others have followed suit, always jumping into the path of moving trains, always on crowded platforms, always followed by the same shower of mysterious yellow dust. Despite the alarming increase in suicides, there's been no official explanation as to why this is happening. Every day there are reports of more jumpers, in more cities. Meanwhile, I've noticed the local membership of Meatz has tripled, and it keeps growing. And I don't even lift. But everyone keeps complimenting me, telling me how ripped I'm getting.
Nothing I've learned prepared me for this. We've grown up in an age of reason, where we can reduce everything into numbers. That which we cannot explain we turn into myth, whispers over campfires, blown up into cheap thrills on the big screen. We've glossed over our fears and the true nature of the world with explanation and tinsel. We never understand what's happening until it's too late. I can't explain what happened to us over the past month. I can't accept it. I can't live with the feeling I have as I sit here laying this all out. I can feel their eyes on the back of my neck as I sit at the desk and try to make sense of it all. Or perhaps I already know, and my mind skitters away from the truth I feel deep in my bones and my gut. One day I will fail and I will join Sarah soon. But there is some time before that, time enough to tell my story, whether you believe it or not. It was a month and a lifetime ago, the first time Sarah and I had gotten away for a real break since our honeymoon. Our lives had filled up with the little hollow milestones of the corporate race, chasing a promotion here, a client there, living from deadline to deadline. No time for children yet, although we were thinking about it. There was more silence between us than words. It felt good to be on the road, leaving our jobs behind for the first time in years. We followed the coast up to New England, Stephen King and Lovecraft country, never knowing where we'd rest our heads or which fork in the road to take. It was on that trip that we wound up at a small, obscure bed and breakfast. I won't say where it is. I would happily go back there and burn it to the ground. Back then, it was magic. We felt alive again. The whitewashed facade broke the horizon with the pride of a tombstone. The owner was a dour and cadaverous man by the name of Bryce. Deep bags under his eyes betrayed his lack of sleep. He possessed an obvious fascination for history and the macabre. The walls were lined with rows of photographs, most yellowed with age. As we wandered deeper down the corridor to our room, they lost the gloss and color of modern photography, reverting to the severe monochrome of yesteryear. Our room was decorated in a lavish Victorian style, a strange departure from the simple modern outlook of the rest of the house. The centerpiece of the room was a lush, magnificent painting on the wall, depicting a serene field and a young girl in a simple yellow frock sitting down to a picnic meal on the green. In the background, a dark, forbidding forest provided contrast to the azure sky and the verdant meadow. Sarah squealed with delight at the find. She'd studied art appreciation at the college where we met. Like water from a dishcloth, our jobs had squeezed many small joys from our lives, but I think she missed the art the most. "Look at the work on this," Sarah gushed, reverently bringing her fingertips almost but not quite to the painting. "It's so fine. You can barely see the brush strokes. And the girl, she looks so sad." I stood beside her, examining the painting. I found it strange that something so exquisite and masterful found a home in such a strange little house so far removed from the beaten trail. Adorning the painting's frame was a brass plaque, its inscription rendered indecipherable by corrosion. I settled down for the evening to catch up on some reading. Sarah couldn't quite get enough of the painting. She spent what seemed like hours staring at it, occasionally pulling me over to examine some minute detail or trick of the brushwork. We stayed there just a single night, but it was one of the most restful we'd ever had. During checkout in the morning, the owner swiped my card. Sarah interjected, "How much for the painting in the room?" Bryce looked up. Where I expected him to appear bemused, or to take offense to the question, he instead gave a look of heartfelt gratitude, his pale features lighting up with a crooked smile, the first I'd seen since we'd been at the inn. "You couldn't stop talking about it at breakfast, could you?" Sarah nodded in response. "It's not good to me here anymore. It reminds me too much of my wife. There's still a little bit of her in that painting, I feel. If the painting really likes you that much, it would be better in your home than mine." I was puzzled at his choice of words. He was a strange man. Perhaps the words had come out garbled. "If the painting really likes you," he had said. I was sure of it. He put another $50 on my card and helped load the painting into the car. As we drove off, I cast a glance at my rearview mirror. Catching a glimpse of Bryce in the reflection, I could have sworn he looked a decade younger. The painting found its new home in our living room. The first order of business was to polish the plaque at the base of the frame. The sharp tang of the solvent stung my nose as I scrubbed away at the green crust. Flake by flake it yielded, till the little metal rectangle gleamed. "A family picnic in the meadow," the inscription read. 1893. A family picnic, but with just a single girl. I stared at the small white figure again. The girl at the picnic wore a wide grin on her face. I was oddly discomforted by that queer smile. Skeptical, I took up my phone to examine the photographs I had taken of the painting earlier and zoomed in on the tiny figure in the images. I held my phone up to the painting to be sure and confirmed my suspicions. The girl hadn't been smiling at the end. I called Sarah into the room to get her opinion, and she brushed off the changes as a trick of the light. When photographing paintings, she argued, the angle and lighting could make all the difference. We laughed it off, but I still gave the painting a furtive look as we left the room. I was hovering in that dark, restless space between exhaustion and slumber when I first felt the warm glow of the summer sun on my skin. The sensation was strange when compared to the crisp springtime chill of our bedroom. Soft grass brushed the skin of my forearms and palms. The light scent of wildflowers tickled my nose. I came to with a start, shaking my head to clear the fog of sleep, and found myself back in my room. The sensation of the open field faded, and I felt an emptiness on the other side of the bed well before I saw the impression of my wife's sleeping form, still warm with lingering body heat and smelling of summer. Rising from bed, I hissed as my toes encountered the frigid parquet floor. "Sarah!" I called into the darkness beyond the bedroom door. Something was there at the edge of my hearing, something that I couldn't make out. I padded through the silent corridor to the living room and found Sarah sitting there, striking a lurid pose in her nightgown. Her eyes were rolled back in her head, the whites glistening in her gloom. Her mouth hung open in a parody of a smile. A string of drool dangled from her chin. Her long brown hair, animated by an inexplicable breeze, blew across her face. And with that, the spell was broken. The windows were shut. The air was still. There was no breeze in the living room. I looked up at the painting and found the girl in the painting leering down at me, seated in a position identical to Sarah's. Just then, a whisper of cloth caught my attention. Turning, I saw Sarah, with all the broken grace of a marionette, rise to her feet and make her way back up the corridor. I felt a crunch under my bare foot. There, its pale juices staining the wooden floor, was a crushed wildflower. Sarah woke up refreshed the next morning. I fared less well. Sleep's embrace, when it finally came, was uncomfortable. The darkness behind my eyelids hid nameless horrors and a smiling girl on a picnic blanket. I approached Sarah as she puttered at the sink and asked if she had slept well. She smiled and told me it was the best sleep she'd had in months, then casually added that she half remembered a dream of talking to someone in a warm place. In an instant, my expression became grim. With Sarah's simple affirmation, all of the strangeness of the night before, which had melted away in the morning sun, came rushing back. Once Sarah had left for the day, I poured myself a stiff drink and took it to the living room. It had once been my favorite room in the house. There was no peace for me there anymore. From the second I stepped into the room, the hair on the back of my neck prickled. It was the painting. I felt as if it was watching me, that she was watching me. The strange brass plaque and the shifting face of the girl in the painting had already unsettled me, but seeing my wife sprawled on the floor with that ghastly smile on her face, that was too much. I resolved to take the painting down and keep it in the garage for a bit. If Sarah asked, I would tell her that I had to take it down to make further repairs. As I tried to lift the heavy frame off the nail on the wall, however, it wouldn't budge. I groped around the edge of the frame, trying to find the spot where the supporting wire hung off the nail in the wall. I tiptoed, attempting to wedge my fingers further in between the wall and the frame. My calves burned with the strain, but I found it just before the muscles gave out. Strangely, there didn't seem to be anything wrong with the wire. I gave a gentle tug and stumbled backwards, gasping as the sharp edge of a nail caught the tip of my index finger and tore a flap of skin off. Meanwhile, the heavy frame fell to the floor with a gunshot-like bang, the sound echoing through the house. Bright crimson welled up and ran down to my knuckles as I got to my feet. Specks of blood dotted the floor, forming a trail leading straight to the painting. Where a large drop had struck the surface of the image, a scarlet smear marred the features of its subject. Beneath the red sheen, the girl's wide smile took a whole new dimension of eeriness. Hiding the painting was one thing, but ruining it was another thing altogether. I scurried to the kitchen and moistened the kitchen towel. The pain had settled into a dull ache. I rushed back to the living room. I knelt over the fallen painting and stared back into the pristine, pale face of the girl. There was blood on the floor. There was blood on my hand. But there was no blood on the painting, only the ever-widening, mocking smile on her face. I fled the room, haunted by the smell of flowers and the whisper of the summer breeze. I moved the painting to the floor of the study and told Sarah that I would fix up something better for it to hang from. The decision didn't sit well with her. We had our first fight in months over it. I won out in the end, only after pointing out that the heavy frame had started to bend the nail in the wall. After that, for a while at least, the painting gave us no more trouble. The respite was short-lived. It wasn't long before the disturbances started up again, slowly at first, always at night, and always unexpected. Lying in my bed, with my toes poking out from under the blanket, I'd dream of the warmth of the summer sun or feel the hot breeze on my skin. I got a prescription for sleeping pills from the doctor. The chemical fog did little to chase away those alien sensations at night. The sense of violation, of invasion, was absolute. There was no rest for me in my own home. It grew worse. Once I found a trail of dirt and blades of grass ending at the foot of our bed. Sarah was curled up in bed. Her deep breaths told me that she was sound asleep. I followed the trail of glass, blade by crushed blade, to the hallway, and left the comfort of my room, knowing full well where it led. The air in the study was hot, the smell of the field magnified into a greenhouse reek. Beads of sweat formed on my brow. As always, the smiling girl was there, staring at me. There was something mocking, something mesmerizing about her eyes. The artist had painted them with a dark humor, so realistically that it looked like looking at a photograph. The flickering moonlight cast her pale face into shadow one moment and silvery illumination the next. The shifting light softened the lines of the painting. The long grass stirred as if by a breeze. I imagined the clouds drifting across the clear blue sky. I leaned closer, taken in by the new illusion. My forearm brushed against the weave of the canvas. And then, pain. I looked at my forearm. A line of blood had formed where I had been scratched. Reeling in horror, I backed away from the painting. The girl was no longer in her relaxed pose. She had stepped a little closer and had extended a sharp fingernail in my direction. Her face, much nearer to the foreground now, bore the same wide, familiar grin. Sarah refused to believe me the next morning. She laughed it off, saying that she had sleepwalking episodes as a child, and suggested that I may have wandered out of the house and into the yard. On the subject of haunted paintings and the like, she would hear nothing more. Occam's razor sliced away at my doubts. The simpler explanation was the better of the two, the one that did not peel back the comforting skin the world wore. Everything could be rationalized. The nocturnal wanderings, my obsession with the painting spilling over into dreams, the light playing tricks on my eyes. Or maybe the girl in the painting was just toying with us. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, Sarah's nightly escapades became more frequent. Surprisingly, I grew accustomed to her nightly wanderings, the strange smells, and the alien sensations. But my last experience was different. That night I woke with a start and noticed Sarah was gone. The sound of a low wordless melody coming from the living room had woken me. Someone was singing. I got out of bed. As I stood up, a hot breeze seared my face. I realized then that something was twisting my senses. I was in my room. It was the middle of spring and the air was still. I stole down the corridor, feeling the worn parquet floor 1 second and blades of grass tickling my feet the next. Meanwhile, the singing grew louder. Curious, I stepped into my study and flicked the light switch on. For a moment, I blinked away the harsh glare of the afternoon sun, and then it was gone, replaced by the soft glow of the ceiling lamp. The painting was still there, but there was something different about it. I could only stand there and gape as my mind struggled to process what my eyes were telling it. The girl wasn't in the painting. Sarah. I had to find her. The living room. The singing. The distance felt like miles. Arriving at the end of the corridor, I again found Sarah seated on the floor with her back turned and wearing a light sundress, the perfect type for a day out in the park. The moonlight through the windows gave the room an unearthly glow. It was then that I realized Sarah was not alone. She was hunched over something. A pair of painfully thin legs poked out from under her right arm. A gaunt arm was hooked around her shoulder. The sharp nails scourged her bare back. Fine, bloody lines stood out on her pale skin. I shuddered and glanced at the scratch on my forearm. I strode over to the light switch and flipped it. For a second, just for a second, I lost sight of both Sarah and that thing. Then, a moment later, it was gone, leaving me alone with my wife. I called out to Sarah but got no response. She continued singing in the same wordless lullaby, all the while rocking back and forth, the bumps of her vertebrae clear against her pale skin. I stepped forward slowly and called out again. Her expression was empty. Her mouth was slack and open, her lips working to force out the nameless tune. The worst, however, was not on her face, but her dress. The strap hung halfway down her shoulder, exposing a single bloodied breast, defaced by distinct crescent-shaped bites. I left Sarah in the living room, intending to put an end to the painting. There was something unholy about it, and I was not going to stop until it had been reduced to ashes. When I next laid eyes on the image, the girl was back where she belonged, sitting in the green meadow. Her lips were ringed with red that ran down her chin. All I needed was some lighter fluid out of the garage and a box of matches. I lifted the heavy frame off the floor and was just about to back out of the room when Sarah barreled into me. She clawed and shrieked like a thing possessed, her nails scrabbling at my chest. She was a waifish 100 pounds, but her frenzied assault brought me to my knees. She managed to wrestle the painting away from me. The sharp edge of the frame caught me flush on my chin. My entire world went white. I sat up. The merciless sun beat down from overhead. Unseen cicadas lent their voices to a shrill chorus. The smell of flowers was overpowering. A mouth-watering feast, a picnic complete with fruit and sandwiches, lay before me, spread out on fine china. And then there was Sarah, seated beside the girl from the painting. There was still something wrong with the tableau. Like the view through the holographic viewfinders from my youth, there were two pictures in front of me. The first, the scene from the painting, with the young girl and the picnic spread. The second, something out of a nightmare. In it, the girl was nothing but a caricature of a human being, dry skin stretched taut over bones. It smiled at me. Sarah just sat there, catatonic. The girl leaned forward and picked up a strawberry from the basket of fruit. Its pale fingers stuffed the plump fruit into Sarah's mouth. I caught a strange glimpse from the corner of my eye and looked again. The strawberry was rancid, its darkened patches beginning to liquefy. I gagged. When the girl opened her mouth, Sarah's voice came out. "You're finally here," it said. "I'm dreaming all this. Sarah's been dreaming you all this time." "Or could it be me dreaming you?" it asked back, smiling with perfect white teeth. "No." I looked again. The teeth were jagged and yellow, poking out from blackened gums. She stuffed another strawberry into Sarah's mouth. I couldn't move my body. I was stuck watching this slow torture, this thing slowly choking my wife. Sarah's eyes bulged as she struggled to breathe. It turned to face me. It's a family portrait. It always needs a family. My family never stays long. Won't you stay too? This one's already mine. We can be so happy together. Such things I can show you. The sanguine juice from the strawberries dripped down Sarah's chin. She began to gag, her throat obstructed. I strained, but my muscles would not obey me. I was utterly helpless. Sarah locked eyes with me. "Help me," they pleaded. "Please help." The girl paused in her ministrations for a moment, leaning across the picnic basket towards me. She stroked the side of my paralyzed face with soft fingers and gave me a sly smile. Somewhere else, that emaciated monstrosity leered at me, raking my cheek with needle-sharp nails. Sarah's voice issued from its cracked lips once more. "You're going to go now. I can't keep you, but you'll be back. Don't fight it. We'll be one happy family." She got closer and kissed me fully on the lips. Just as she pulled back, she caught the edge of my lip with those rotten teeth. There was a sting as she bit down hard, and when she sat back next to my wife, a smear of my blood encircled her lips. She waved as my world went white. When I came to, Sarah was beside me on the floor. Her eyes had once again rolled back into her head, and she was shaking like a leaf in the wind. A thin line of blood trickled down her chin, resembling the juice from earlier. I took one last look at the smiling girl and the painting before I left. It wasn't the same painting we had brought home. I saw it as it really was. The grass, brown and wilted as far as the eye could see. Bones strewn in the field, bleached white by the harsh sun. The sky blood red, and the girl, a horror of skin and bones, grinning wildly, my blood still visible on her lips. I scooped Sarah up and left the house. The doctor said she had suffered an aneurysm. Somewhere along the highways and byways within Sarah's brain, there was a little loop of traffic, a small loop where things didn't flow as planned. And one day, nobody knows why it was that day and not some other, there was an accident. Sarah's strange behavior, after the fact, was so easy to explain. She had a seizure when the blood vessel burst. I got up, and in my mad haste to rush her to the hospital, I had run into something. I had blacked out and hallucinated the encounter. It was so deceptively easy to believe because it fit in the system of the world, the ordered lie we pretend to believe. But it all came crashing down soon enough. After spending a week living out of an overnight bag at the hospital, I was finally evicted by Sarah's parents and forced to go home to get some proper rest. The first thing that caught my eye was the painting. I felt the reality of the past few weeks come crashing down on me. The feeling of it drove me to my knees. I pulled myself to my feet, suddenly unable to breathe. I wasn't sure if I'd ever see Sarah as she once was. Regardless, I wasn't going to allow the painting's presence in my home for another minute. I was hosting it off the floor when something caught my eye. There in the meadow, basking in the bright summer sun, was Sarah. Sarah, my beautiful wife, captured in paint on a canvas more than 100 years old. Her appearance was unmistakable. I'd woken up beside her for the better part of a decade, and even through the haze of tears I recognized her features. And as before, the girl in yellow sat beside her, smiling at me, an arm draped around my wife's slim shoulders. I fear sleep now, worrying that one day I will wake up back in that meadow with Sarah and the girl. I tremble at the thought of returning there, helpless to defend Sarah. But most of all, I dread that whatever was left in the painting wasn't going to be my wife anymore. That even if I found a way to get her back, if that shell in the hospital bed with the tubes and wires and pumps opened its eyes again, it wouldn't be Sarah. I'll never know who Bryce had lost to the painting or how long he had watched and waited and dreamt in that New England inn. I remember the look on his face when we drove off. Freedom. I have to stop. The painting is still there, and the weight of their stares is too much to bear. Before going to bed, I touch a shaky fingertip to the painted doppelganger of my wife. I raise it back to my own lips to kiss her goodnight, and notice a slight aftertaste. Not the dust coating the painting, or the chemical tang of paint. Something different. Something slightly salty. The taste of tears.
Chilling tales for dark nights.